So davening is at 6:30 today, so we'll have a short session. Anyway, we'll see what happens. It's really extraordinary what's going on in the world today, huh? Okay, so let's get started because we have a short one today. We were talking about yesterday a new tshuva from Rav Sharaga about a worker who is allotted a transportation expense, and he wants to be able to keep the money that he's saving by walking to work or getting rides. And he wants to know if it's ethical and halachically acceptable for him to keep that money. So Rav Sharaga brought three proofs that we looked at yesterday. One is from the Gemara in Ksuvis, which says that if a woman is given a stipend, a food allowance by her husband, if she doesn't want to eat the full amount, in other words, if she doesn't want to spend the full amount on her food, she returns the surplus to her husband. But as one of the poskim was able to infer, that's only if she really just doesn't need it. But let's say she really wants to use that entire expense, but she scrimps and saves so that she can squirrel away some funds, those she is allowed to keep if she's actually depriving herself in order to save. Another proof that he brought is from a Mishnah in Maseches Nazir, that if a woman makes a vow of Nazirism, she has to, and her husband does not annul her vow, then she has to bring karbanos. And the Gemara asks, where is she going to get the money to bring her own korban if everything that she acquires belongs to her husband? And one of the answers of the Gemara is shekimtza me'isata, that she scrimps and saves from the dough allowance that her husband gives her. So you see, that is also an indication that if a woman were to squirrel away money from her regular food allowance, then she'd be allowed to keep it, even though it was allocated for a very specific purpose. The third proof is now so we saw from Ksuvis, from Nazir, and now the third proof that he brought, which we just last saw yesterday, is from Maseches Gittin. If a person injures someone else's slave, and this is not so analogous, but I guess there's a bit of an analogy here. And the doctors, so the halacha is that when you injure someone else's slave, you're obligated to compensate the owner of the slave for the damage, including the time off workers' comp, the time off that the slave cannot work. So if the doctors had originally estimated that this fellow would be off of work for 5 days, and then we were able to get him a certain kind of specialist who gave him a medicine that allowed him to heal in 3 days, the person who caused the injury is still obligated to pay for 5 days of time of workers' comp. And if the so therefore, what you see basically is that if you can find a way to save money, this, by the way, will have ramifications. Let's say if someone causes you damage in a car accident and you're able to show them an estimate that the cost of repair is going to be $2,000, and in the meantime, you're able to get, I don't know, Federico to go ahead and fix it for much cheaper. So, then you'd be allowed to keep the surplus amount because you've gotten a legitimate estimate as how much it's going to cost. Okay, so it's not exactly analogous, but it is essentially saying that once a person is assessed with a reasonable amount of money or has committed to a reasonable amount of money for either compensation or for damages, if I'm able to save money and use that money for another purpose, then that's perfectly legitimate according to halacha. Okay, and so therefore, just to cut to the chase, he says, "V'nira lomar, shafilu im lokach oto ezi yedid o mukar v'hu lo tarach v'lo lo kesef. And therefore, getting back to our issue, this person who has a transportation allowance to get to work every day, but instead decides to either have a friend or an acquaintance take him and pick him up every day. So then the answer, and it doesn't end up costing him any money, then this employee can still keep the transportation allowance. He says, and don't think that you have a moral or halachic obligation to give that transportation expense to your friend who's picking you up. He says the reason is because he knows he's doing it for free. And there's the expectation of quid pro quo does not come in the form of hard cash remuneration, but rather you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. In other words, there is an understanding, it's an implicit understanding that if I offer to pick you up because you're on my way to work and I don't mind doing it and it doesn't cost me any extra money, and I'm happy to save you the money, right? Then I know that you're going to end up doing favors for me in the future as well. I've got your back, you've got my back. Kamosha Kasuv, matana kemecher, kim lo haya osa lo tova, lo haya noten lo matana. Because we know that giving a person a gift is a legal transaction that involves a quid pro quo. That everyone understands that by my doing you a favor, you're going to compensate me in some way in the future, or at least that's your intention. And therefore, there's no need to compensate the person who's picking me up. Similarly, let's say my company pays for me and they have an expense account for transportation or for travel, or it's not my company, but let's say I'm under contract with a company, and they pay for my taxi fare. They say we assume you're going to take a cab and it's going to cost you this much, and I want to save money, and I take a bus instead. I take public transportation instead, and I say, listen, I'd rather use that money for something else. Shahapoel zacha bekesef, aval b'tanai shelo yagia la'avoda ayev. He says he's allowed to keep that money, provided with one proviso, that taking public transportation will not in any way compromise his performance at work. In other words, let's say the reason why your employer says we'd prefer to send a car for you is because we want you to be fresh in the morning. And if it's a 20-minute taxi ride, but an hour bus ride. And you say, well, I'll leave early, I don't mind. But by the time you get to work, you're already tired because you need a break because you've been on the bus for an hour. Well, that's not right. He says, if you get to work tired because you took the public transit, because you wanted to save money, then that's a problem. That might be a problem of theft. You're stealing from your company by not being as fresh as you could be. Kevin sha'over al das hama'avid, because you're in some way abusing the trust of your employer. Aval b'chazara shechozer min ha'avoda labayit yachol linsua ba'otobus v'lakachat et ha'hefresh al demei hamonit b'shvilo. So that would certainly be an issue if it's on your way to work. But certainly at the end of the day, if you wanted to take the bus, you're not compromising your presentability in any way at the end of the day, because you're leaving work and you say to yourself, I don't mind taking the hour bus ride. Maybe I don't want to see my wife. I don't want to see my kids. Let her put the kids to bed, or whatever your reason is for saying, maybe I'll spend a little bit more time on my way home, not going directly home and saving money. That's fine. And that's not going to be a problem whatsoever.
To being on time for work. So you gotta make sure you're not late because you're taking.
Exactly. Okay. We'll skip the footnote right now. Just let's finish the tshuva. The kol shekain b'makomot avodah shahotzaot hanesiya hu chelak mimarkivei haschar va'afilu im lo nosea hu mekabel nesiot zevadai shahakesef shalom. And so Rav Sharaga concludes and says that everything that I've said up until now is in a situation where the company provides you with a transportation expense account. And they basically allot you this for transportation. He says it's certainly true if it's part of your salary package. And basically they give this to you even if you end up never needing to use it. All employees get the same transportation compensation, regardless of how far or how close they live to work. You're certainly entitled to keep that money, because in that situation, it's clear, it's self-evident that the employer has no expectation that you're going to be using the money for transportation specifically. It's just an added bonus.
So what happens if they give you a parking spot downtown and you decide you're gonna rent it out?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because you could make a lot, that's a good side hustle, right? Yeah, you could easily make a lot of money by subletting your parking space. You probably, because it's private property, remember we learned about this, about is it permissible to sublet an apartment when you're renting an apartment. And one of the things we saw is that in a standard contract, it usually says you can only sublet with permission of the landlord. Would that be the case? Are you considered to be a tenant when your employer gives you a parking spot? Probably not, because he's not granting you exclusive use like it's your piece of real estate now. He's giving you permission to park there so that you can come to work. It's probably arguably more self-evident that he's not giving it to you as just a perk that you can use exclusively at your discretion.
Well, what about when companies often lease some of their employees, or the employees will lease them cars, and those cars are sometimes, let's say you want to use that car and go on vacation. You're not using it really for work, right? So it's
well, I guess it all depends on what the stipulation is at the outset, which is going to be true in a lot of these situations. A company that leases a car for its employees probably does not expect them to use the car exclusively just to get to and from work. But they probably will cap certain mileage, just like,
well, I guess as long as it doesn't cost them any more money when they give the car back.
Right.
I guess they wouldn't care, right?
Yeah, you would assume so. Yeah. Unless a stipulation is made explicitly that you can only use this car Monday through Friday for getting to work, which I don't think is usually done. Okay.
Yesterday, so you still have to have a log because it's a taxable benefit. The personal use.
It is taxable.
Personal use.
Yeah. So
I got audited for this once.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you pass?
Yeah, I guess so. You just have to present the whole year of what you did. So I have to scramble a little bit, jog the memory, because they want to separate the personal from the business part. How much you already have.
Right. Right. Well, insurance companies do the same thing, right? They'll ask you how many miles are you operating the car for, to get to and from work. Okay. Last thing he says, just to take a quick look at this footnote, he says, "V'lechora hayanira litlos nidon didan b'machlokas Rabbeinu Meir v'Rabbeinu Ephraim shehuva b'rosh b'bavakama." He brings this machlokas in the Rishonim, b'inyan ma'isa shahaya, b'Reuven shahaya tzarech l'shalem kesef l'goy. Reuven owed money to a particular non-Jew. V'shalach Shimon lasos came, and he sends Shimon as his proxy to bring the cash to the non-Jew. Ve'achar kach noda shehagoy shochach mehakesef. And it turns out later that the non-Jew forgot about the debt and is not expecting the money. So who keeps the money? Does Reuven keep it or does Shimon keep it? Lemi magia hakesef. Rabbeinu Meir Kosef b'tshuva the hakesef chozer l'Reuven al pi madi isa b'gemarasha. Adaita da'aryeh afgere, adaita dekuli alma lo afgere. He says, well, the Gemara over there is talking about a person who sees that his property is about to be eaten by a lion, but then the lion, for whatever reason, goes away. So if a person made it hefker, does that give everyone a right to go and take it now that the lion is gone? The Gemara says no. He only made it hefker because he thought the lion was going to eat it, but he didn't make it hefker for everyone just to take it. And similarly, Reuven gave the money to Shimon, knowing that it was going to be surrendered over to the non-Jew, but not so that Shimon could keep it. So on the one hand, it goes back to Reuven, but Rabbeinu Ephraim disagrees, and he says that the money should go to Shimon, because since once Reuven relinquished that money to Shimon, he completely forgot about it. It's almost like he made it hefker, and therefore Shimon gets to keep the money. And so it would seem that this is a bit analogous to the money that an employer relinquishes or releases to an employee. So we'll have to look at that in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. An easy, meaningful fast.